Welcome to another episode of On Patrol with the Suffolk County PBA. I'm CJ Hunter, the treasurer of the PBA.
I'm Tanner Brandemar, the sergeant at arms of the PBA.
And today we're excited to have Ray Tierney. Ray's the Suffolk County District Attorney. Thanks for coming on, Ray.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
So Ray is an interesting case where he's risen through to one of the highest offices, right, in Suffolk County, the District Attorney, countywide office. But he's not even a career politician. This is your first elected office.
Yeah, I had never. I started out as an ADA, and I sort of fell in love with prosecution. So I think my intention was to be a career prosecutor. And usually, when you're a career prosecutor, that's what you do. And if you want to be a politician, there's a different path to that.
Right.
And never joined a political party. Always just sort of stayed in my lane. And through a confluence of events, I had the opportunity to run for DA. But when people say to me, I want to learn your story so I could, figure out how to one day be, a district attorney. I said, don't follow my story, right, because it's just not the way it usually works. But, very, very fortunate and very happy to be the DA, but certainly an unconventional path.
Yeah, I think unconventional path is the exact terms I was using earlier today. And, we've had Jesse Garcia on earlier, a few weeks ago. And when we asked him about screening for candidates and trying to figure out who he wants to support, he spoke about just the people that naturally fit into the role, the people that, maybe they're involved in their communities and just would be more of a natural fit, not forced upon them, the kind of office they're running for. And it sounds like he found that in you as a career prosecutor, somebody who's worked at, in the DA's office as an assistant district attorney, but also ended up working in the U.S. attorney's office, right? And you've been putting bad guys away as a career.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, so I had started out, I worked in the DA's office, I worked in the U.S. attorney's office, then I was working in the Brooklyn DA's office. And, I had never, like I said, I'd never been a member of a political party. I was just doing my thing in Brooklyn. And I get a call from a friend of mine who I didn't even realize was involved in politics. And he said, hey, would you be interested in running for DA? And I said, well, I don't know. I never really thought about it. And why are you asking me that? And he said, well, I'm a Republican committeeman. Jesse Garcia wants to talk to you. So I said, okay, I'll talk to him. But that's the way it happened,
right.
And it was, and then when they asked me to run, initially I was like, well, I think I could do a good job, but I've never run for office before. Am I biting off more than I could chew? But the one thing my father always told me is you're allowed to complain about things provided you don't have the opportunity to change them. But once you have the opportunity to change things and you don't, you can no longer complain. So I said, you know what? I've always said that, we should do it this way. This is the way they should do things. Now I'm being given the opportunity to maybe do something about it. So I really owe it to myself and, to do it. So I took the leap. And
Jesse talked about that. He wanted somebody that wasn't a politician. He was looking for somebody that had the credentials, that had the impressive resume like you do to run.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole thing was like I was like sort of surprised, and it's a credit to him really because when it comes to there's not many things I could do. Certainly, I've been a prosecutor for 30 years. I know the business, and so he really leaned heavy on the prosecutorial experience as opposed to the political aspect of it.
Right. And I think that advice that your father gave you is great advice too. I mean, we see it all the time, right? We're in positions to make changes, right? If we see something wrong, we try to fix it. And I think that's great advice. And, kind of guiding you into a direction where you could be that positive contributor to society rather than just pointing out what's wrong all the time.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, everybody likes to be a critic. And everybody's quick to criticize, which is great. But then the second part is you have the responsibility. Okay, you've identified the problem. You're complaining about the problem. Now take the next step and try to do something about the problem. So my dad was good like that. He had a whole bunch of sayings that he would always talk to me about.
Right. Now, did your dad or your mom have any influence on you going into law and wanting to be a prosecutor growing up?
So my grandfather was a lawyer and was a judge in the city. My dad had a learning disability, so he went to the University of Wyoming on a football scholarship. But he was not good with the books. So he kind of got kicked out of school, went into the military, got out of school, and worked for the phone company. My dad was a really smart guy, just was not good at school. So, but he taught me, like my dad was my biggest influence because he basically taught me everything that I know, and I my dad, notwithstanding how he did in school, was the smartest guy I ever met, and certainly the biggest influence on me.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point that out too, because sometimes being smart sometimes gets equated to the level of education you achieve, but that's not always the case. You could be a very smart guy and never finish college, right? And I think it sounds like your dad's a prime example of that. One of the guys that is another prime example. Just recently assassinated, Charlie Kirk.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that guy never went to college, never finished up a degray, but I don't think anybody could argue that he's at least one of the most intelligent men that was in this country up until his assassination.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I look back on pictures of my mom and my dad. They grew up in Brooklyn, and they were out there. They're very street smart, and very independent at a very early age. I look at me, and I was less so, but I still had that element to me. And then we look at our kids today, and I think sometimes our kids today, a lot of them are very well educated, but they have no sort of practical experience, and they're sort of coddled. So I think you definitely need both of those things to be successful, and having that life experience is irreplaceable.
Yeah, I agree, and I think part of that intelligence too, it comes with a sense of being able to kind of figure things out on your own, right? Like a street smart, right? If you're not getting that college education, but you still end up ultimately being successful and raising, productive children, you have a sense of street smarts and problem solving techniques, right? And the ability to kind of get to where you want to be in the unconventional way, maybe breaking new ground in some respects.
Yeah, I mean, and just talking about it now, I mean, those are the best cops, right?
Absolutely.
The cops with the life experience, the cops who know how to relate to anyone from, a street person to a PhD, problem solving, figuring out ways to solve problems before they become a problem, figuring out ways to solve problems before they become physical or dangerous. So yeah, police is law enforcement is one of those professions where you really do need a certain personality and a certain skill set.
Yeah, so not only does that make the best cops, in my opinion, but I think it also makes the best DAs, right? So you've brought some innovation and some new technology, so to speak, to the district attorney's office since you took over in January 1st, 2022, right? There's been a number of changes, and you've taken the most up-to-date technology and the best new practices forward to try to put some of the bad guys away here in Suffolk County.
Yeah, I think when I look back on my career, I was not, a lot of the, you read a lot about people, and it's like, oh, was bureau chief at 30 years of age, was this at this age. I took the long way around. I was a trial courtroom prosecutor for a long, long time, and by doing that, I learned so much. I learned so much about prosecution and law enforcement investigations. And so what I was able to do was all those things that I learned, I was able to apply them to my office once I became DA. And I think the biggest thing is the way our society has changed. If you looked back in 1990, if there was a robbery case, right? If a guy walked into a deli and robbed it, right? Well, what would it be? You'd have a statement from the clerk. Maybe you'd recover the gun. Maybe you'd recover some proceeds. There'd be an identification procedure, maybe an oral statement, maybe a written statement. That's your case. And the police come in, they put it together in 4 or 5 days. They give it to you, and that's your case for all time. Now you take that same case, right? And you look at it and you say to yourself, okay, well, how did that guy get there? Mm-hmm. Who drove him? Were they using phones? What does the GPS on their cars say? What do their phones say? Was there social media posts? Was there video? Was there DNA, touch DNA, with regard to the mask that was recovered or the gun that was recovered? Was there license plate reader data? Was there video along the way? And all of these things are what juries expect to see now because we all watch TV. So this is what they're looking for. And police officers and detectives who investigate cases, they need to obtain these things because all this, the cell site location, the video, all of these things exist, but they only exist for a short period of time. So the police need to go out and get that, but they need subpoenas and search warrants to get it. So they need help from prosecutors. So we can do that with the officers. So what we really need to do is we need to be working hand in glove as soon as possible. So when something serious happens, we can go out and within 48 hours, get all that evidence before it disappears. And that's what we try to do in our cases.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. A lot of the changes that have occurred over the last 2-3 decades with technology and how to build the cases, right? Because that part of that is the argument for why we really need more cops now. But it sounds like you probably need more ADAs too in order to be able to sort through all this and build these cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think you talk about detectives, and we that case, right? Like that case when I started in 1992, one detective could do that, right?
Right.
So now you take that same case. Okay, the one detective is interviewing the witnesses. All right, so who's doing the video canvas? Mm-hmm. Who's looking at who's doing the social media scrubs? Who's going out and checking the license plate readers? Who's talking to the lab to see if we could come in and get the scene process for DNA or what have you? So we need more. It's more sophisticated. So you need more cops. You need more DAs. You need more analysts. You need more lab personnel because that's the way, the practice has evolved. So, we as law enforcement have to evolve along with our society. And we have all these things out there. The juries will expect us to get them. And if we don't, it'll be held against us in our case.
There's video everywhere. There's video cameras everywhere. And I'm sure the detectives, it's not just the video in front of the house on the Ring doorbell cameras. There's cameras from different houses in different locations, and even the cop's body cam. Yep. How valuable has that been for a lot of your cases, you feel?
Well, it's funny, the body cam, I think when people were when proponents for body cams wanted, we're asking that we get body cams. I think the thought was among a lot of people that the body cam was going to show a lot of things that were not so complimentary to the police. But I think what we're finding is, way more often than not, the body cam is showing what's actually happening. And also, it's really helping our cases, but also helping to protect cops in instances where you have a bad result, but the police didn't do anything wrong. So it's been tremendously helpful. And it's also, it's funny, I talk about this all the time. When I started in 1992 and you would hear police talking about a certain incident, like, a car flying through the air or shots being fired, or police would talk about that, or an eyewitness would talk about that. And you would say, well, that sounds like kind of crazy. Like, I don't know if that really happened. It sounds a little bit like an exaggeration. But now you see these videos and you see what's happening.
Really justifies it.
And it's like, wow, like it's exactly as they described it. I mean, I don't even think it was a criminal case, but I don't know if you guys saw the video where the elderly guy, he had a medical event, so he passed out.
Went over the Sunrise Highway, right?
Went over the Sunrise Highway.
Where I live.
Yeah. And you saw that video, and if someone described that to you, you say, okay, well, he didn't really go over the highway. But then you look at the video, and it's like, no, that's exactly what he did.
That was a crazy video. Yeah.
That was great. And with everybody's cell phones out now, too, like somebody actually caught that on a cell phone camera, and I saw that on social media before it ever hit the real news. Yeah. That was wild.
Yeah. So, we had a case, Brandon Scanlon, who tried to run over a Suffolk County police officer and then fired shots at the police officer. And again, you hear that story. You said, try to run him over. It was, did that really happen? And then you look at the video, body camera and otherwise, and you're like, yep, no, that's what happened.
Yeah, yeah. And we were all just recently at the sentencing for Brandon Scanlon. And, he was charged with the attempted murder of police officers. And we were happy to see him receive a sentence that was going to keep him locked up for 2 decades and then followed up by probation too. So he was still going to be monitored to see how he acclimates back to the general public. So especially in a day like today, in the age we're living in, where it seems like very often people are not held accountable for the crimes they commit, right? The penalties aren't fitting the crimes. It's great to have a team here in Suffolk County where the district attorney's office, the police department, everybody works together, and we try to hold these bad actors accountable and make sure there's a deterrent to committing crime into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of my biggest thoughts when I became DA is like, look, there's all this rhetoric out in the media, all this discussion, but at the end of the day, it's about personal responsibility, and you have to hold people responsible and make them be responsible for that which they actually do. So if you go out, and again, when you're talking about an individual who we're involved in a long-term narcotics investigation, and we have a whole plan as to what we're going to do as far as how we're going to. Now we have a number of targets, and we're gonna execute a number of search warrants. We're going to take it down. Something happens now where we have to move on a house quick, so we have the police officers go to that house. Scanlon comes out of the house. He tries to run over a police officer, fires shots, and now he's involved in a chase. And when you talk about the danger to the police officers, but to the danger to the general public, and you look at all of that video and all the things that happen, and you say to yourself, while the initial officer who was struck with the car suffered an injury, that was it.
Right.
And we got off really, really easy as far as the police and, just as importantly, members of the general public. Because don't forget, if you're going to fire at, a police officer, right, you're going to fire at anybody. If you're endangering that police officer, you're endangering the hundreds, if not thousands of members of the public that you came in contact with. So there has to be a penalty commensurate with the
100%.
risk that you, the risk that you,
and it shows that there's a deterrent to other people to act that way.
Yeah, no, and that's like one of my, like our jokes is, don't steal other people's stuff. We don't say stuff, but but it's like that's basic, there's nothing that infuriates people more, right? Like you go to bed, with your family, you get up in the morning, wife, takes one car, you jump in the other car, you're going to drop your kids off at work. I mean, you're going to drop your kids off at school, then you're going to go to work. You turn the key in and nothing happens. You look down, the entire bottom of your car is missing. Right? Like that now. So now what does that mean? Now, how are the kids getting to school? How are you going to get to work? When are you going to get the car back? What is it going to cost you? So if you are an individual who does that to another person in your community, there should be a sanction for that.
Absolutely.
I think also, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think also that's happening everywhere in a lot of places. But I think you showing that deterrent keeps people from coming in from the city, because that's what really was happening. I feel like a lot of people are coming in from the city, coming out to Suffolk County, because it takes like a couple of minutes to do that, to take the catalytic converters and go. But you set a precedence that we're not going to allow this out here. Right?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the things we do, like we just had a case with, they're stealing clothes out of the St. Vincent de Paul clothing bins.
Yeah, that was a wild video too.
Yeah. And you say, well, what's the big deal? Well, what is that clothing used for? Well, that clothing is used for. The St. Vincent de Paul takes that clothing. They either use it to clothe poor people, or they sell it, and then they take that money and they use it to buy food or shelter or health care for the most needy in our society, to the tune of many millions of dollars. And two conspiracies, two groups were going out and stealing this clothing, to the point where St. Vincent de Paul was losing over $1 million a year.
It's crazy.
So there again, if you look at it and you say, well, what's the big deal? The big deal is it has a tremendously negative effect on our community, especially the most needy in our communities. So there should be a, commensurate reaction to law enforcement. And we do that. And then we have a press conference, because the whole purpose of the press conference is to say, hey, we will hold you responsible for this. So do us all a favor, leave the clothing to the people who need it, and just walk away.
Right. Advertise that deterrent. So people don't think that, the risk of getting locked up for 2 hours and then having a desk appearance ticket is worth, trying to get these thousands of dollars worth of items. And as you put it, over the course of time, it ends up being millions of dollars.
And we knew the problem. And so we could have, gone out and spent, a week on the case, and we wouldn't have had a good case. We wouldn't have had a lot of proof. Nothing really would have happened. But we said, let's take our time. Let's get video. Let's put the pieces together, and let's be able to illustrate to the court, like, look, the claim might be that this isn't a big deal, but this is a big deal. This is what they're doing. This is the amount of the loss. This is the effect of that loss. And as a result, this is what we think should happen.
Right. And that's the big value with these, conspiracy cases and these RICO cases, right? Instead of locking the same people up 20 times for petty larcenies and they're out in a few hours, you're getting them with real felony criminal charges that's going to actually lock them up for a substantial period of time.
Yep. I think one of the things that I've learned over the 30 years that I've been doing this is, when you look at like violence, when you look at like recidivist crime, there is an infinitesimally small percentage of the population that's committing that. Like, when I say small, it's like less than 1% who are persistent, lawbreakers. And so when we do our cases, we want to keep people safe, right? We want to protect everybody's quality of life, because that's why we live in Suffolk County. So what we want to do is we want to, affect that infinitesimally small percentage of the population. I mean, if you look at gun violence, right? If you looked at the shootings in Suffolk County, if you probably took 130 people, are affecting or probably responsible for some 80, 70% of the shootings, which is really insane, right? So really, if you can be intelligent and data driven in what you do, and you affect those individuals, the overall effect on the community is going to be so much better. Right.
Yeah. If you could put a case together where it gets rid of that, say, one set of blood gang members, and it ends up getting rid of 40% of the shootings that have occurred, right? That's significant. And you've been doing that with these task forces and conspiracy charges.
So when we started, shootings had been up, were steadily rising, and we were saying, like, why is this happening? And really, basically, the vast majority of the shootings were gang based, and you'd have geographical gangs that held control of certain areas on Long Island, and one gang would go into the territory of the other gang, shoot it up, broadcast it on social media, and then that other gang would lick their wounds and then immediately go back and do a retaliatory shooting. So you had this tit for tat shooting. So every shooting not only guaranteed the violence in that one area, but also guaranteed a retaliatory.
It was reciprocated.
Yeah. So we said we've got to like put these conspiracies together, marry the conspiracies with the violence, and take the small percentage of violent actors off the street. We had one individual who, at the time we came in, he was charged with a number of drive-by shootings, which at the time were charged as reckless endangerments. And he was suspected in about 19 of these things and charged with a number of them. And the thing about reckless endangerment, right? It's not bail eligible. So we said, so basically what's happening is, the police would go out, do a really good job, arrest him for reckless endangerment. He'd go, to court, and his defense attorney said it's not bail eligible, and he'd walk out, and then it would continue. So what we said is, how can we make this bail eligible? Well, what's happening? What's he doing? Well, he's shooting the gun, right? So that's a gun. That's criminal possession of a weapon. That's criminal use of a weapon. That's bail eligible. So how do we prove that? Well, we go and we get a video. We get some of the ballistic material that was left at the scene. We have an expert come in and say, this could only have been left by a firearm. So now we can prove that it was criminal possession of a weapon. We could charge him with criminal possession of a weapon. We could go in court, argue bail, and keep him in on bail. So when we came into office, we realized that this individual was out here and he was a main driver of violence. We put together a case on January 15 days after I came into office. He was held in on bail. We asked our federal partners to help us. Feds indicted him. He went to the federal system. He's still in jail.
Right.
4 years later. And if you look at our violence numbers in 2024 were down 68, 69% from what it was in 2021 before we got into office. So it has an effect.
Right.
And so that's what we do, working again, hand in glove with our gang folks in the Suffolk County DA's office, because now that when the Suffolk County gang guys go out or the regular investigators go out, that we've got to be able to tell them, this is what we're looking for. Let's make sure we get bail. And also these are two rival gangs. So, be careful, because there's going to be a shooting over here. Now the cops, know that already, but it's good to collaborate.
100%. Sharing information is great. And I think in one regard, we're fortunate to have this technology available now where you could put these cases together and be able to charge with the actual firing of the weapon, right, and possession of the weapon to make these people bail eligible. But in another regard, it's crazy that we have to think so outside the box to be able to hold these people on bail. Right. So, the New York state laws and the bail reform and discovery reform that we've seen, it's great to have a partner in you going up to Albany all the time and lobbying for these changes, because you see a problem with the current status and the recent bail reforms and criminal justice reforms. And you're trying to be that change, just like your father taught you to be.
Well, I'm laughing because, we've all gone up to Albany together and sort of beat our heads against the wall,
right,
trying to get them to change some of the laws. And when you talk about bail reform and criminal justice reform, I think there's a lot of rhetoric, and reform is good. And so obviously I'm not against reform. I would say that the discovery and the bail reform, all those things, we probably needed to reform the system. And so if prior to the change of the law, if we were here, if we moved it over here, that would be perfect. But they sort of moved it back.
They overcorrected
over here.
Yeah.
So now what we're trying to do, and we work with you guys and other groups, is to say, okay, we were here, right? Now we're here with a few common sense tweaks of this law, not a repeal of the law, but just a couple of common sense tweaks. We could move the pendulum back where it makes more sense. Mm-hmm. And because a lot of times we see, like in the body part case.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up.
Where the police, did a great job, right? We have, and the funny thing about it is like, so you have that whole case was you have 6 people went into a room. Nobody knows what happens in the room. 4 people come out, right? And then start driving around Babylon and dropping off body parts, right? And so and now citizens see the body parts, they call the police come out and they investigate. And I don't remember exactly, but it was within less than 48 hours, certainly. They had they had the perpetrators identified. Great job by the police. Fantastic job by the police. But we don't know what happened in that room, right? We don't know if it was a murder, it was self-defense, if it was one person who participated in the murder, if it was or 4. We don't know anything. What we do know is that these body parts, and it's illegal to unlawfully dispose of body parts and evidence like that. So we charged them with that. But that's not bail eligible.
Which is wild.
So they got out, and then who was criticized? I was criticized.
Right.
But no, it's not. That's why we have an absurd result, because our bail law is one size fits all, and the legislature uses their expertise to tell you what's bail eligible and what's not, rather than the litigants and the judge. So, that was ridiculous result, but that was what the law demanded. But we continue to work with the police, and eventually we were able to charge the murders. But it takes time. And, and people say, well, what took you so long? And I'll say, we were moving, those cops were working, day and night to identify the perpetrators, and then continuing to work day and night to find out, okay, what exactly happened with regard to those deaths. And they got a result. But the purpose of bail, you should be able to consider dangerousness.
Absolutely.
And if we were able to consider dangerousness, the whole issue would have been avoided.
Right, because if you could consider dangerousness, a judge will have the power to say, these people that disposed of a dismembered corpse are dangerous enough to the public where they should be locked up. We shouldn't be letting them free.
Yep.
But because of the way the law was written, they had no choice. They had to let them out.
Yep. And I think, I think that's what we need to think. And when you talk about dangerousness, it's in the federal system. I think Illinois just recently abandoned the dangerousness standards. So it's us and Illinois that are the only two outliers among the states. And it's difficult. I just interviewed yesterday a kid from a young ADA from Massachusetts who's moving back, and he's considering, whether he wants to work in Suffolk. And I was talking to him about, well, if you come to Suffolk, if you come to New York, and if you prosecute cases. Now, he's coming from Massachusetts, which is a very progressive jurisdiction. I'm saying you're going to have a big problem with bail, because in Massachusetts, you could argue dangerousness. So you're going to have an issue with an adjustment with regard to bail, but also you don't have the discovery requirements in Massachusetts that you have here. So I warned him. I said, when you get here, you're going to be very, very frustrated because it's a different practice.
Right. Now, how daunting is the discovery form for your office? Because I know we were recently at court again for a hearing involving the Brendan Gallagher case, right? The bad guy there was Cody Fisher, who eventually pleaded guilty and is now serving time. But I know leading up to the sentencing and during some of the hearings, the discovery reform became an issue.
Yeah, that's no different than any of our other cases. I think, what you have is a law where you have to provide every single piece of paper in the case, every single item in the case, including body-worn cameras, including paperwork, and you have very condensed time in which to do it. And if you don't do it properly, or if you leave something out, that you stand the risk of the case getting dismissed. And I'll give you like a quick example of that. So say you have a situation where it's a stolen car case, and a cop is on patrol. He looks up, he sees something suspicious. He looks at the license plate. He jots the license plate down on a piece of scrap paper, and then he runs it in the computer and he says, "Oh, that's a stolen car." He pulls the stolen car over, and then there's a gun is recovered or whatever. So now we do all the paperwork, and we give the report over where he says, I saw it, I wrote it down, and then this is the license plate. So the information is there, and we go to the police, and they do everything, and they find everything, and they give it to us, and we hand it over, we certify the case, and then all of a sudden, police comes to us and says, I was just looking and I found this scrap of paper. Now we have to give that scrap of paper, but now the defense gets the opportunity to make the argument, well, the certificate of completeness was illusory. They didn't give us everything. We want the case dismissed. And, what is the information? The information it
hasn't changed.
Is exactly what it was in this paper. So there's no prejudice. There's no intent to deceive. There's no advantage gotten. But because this
small technicality,
basically. And because the statute is so punitive, it imperils the case. So, that is something that needs to change, and there needs to be some, a standard of, is there prejudice? What is there bad intent? Is there, or because it's impossible. Body worn camera, we have hours and hours. If you have a big case, like a murder case, in a public place, there's going to be hundreds of hours of body-worn camera footage. And now what we have to do is we have to get that. We have to cut it up. We have to redact it, in certain instances, and we have to turn it over. Oftentimes they're going to be exactly the same.
Right.
But if we don't do it in a certain amount of time, where is the potential is there where we're going to potentially lose the case. And I think if you look at it, one case it's onerous, but if you look at the thousands of cases we look at a year, it's really onerous. And what it does is it drains our resources. So it makes us less able to do more cases quicker.
And not for nothing, but that's 1,000 more opportunities for a real bad guy to get out based on a technicality, not because he's not guilty of committing the crime he's charged with.
Yeah. And one of the things I tried to argue to the legislature is when you look at these things, when you look at, any decision on a case that is made on anything other than the merits is by definition an injustice.
Absolutely.
So if you have a case and we get to litigate it, and whether we win or lose, and we lose and we're not happy with the result, well, at least that was an adjudication on the merits. But if we have a situation where we have a case and then there's a technical that you're found to be in technical noncompliance with a statute, and you lose that case on those grounds, well, that's not on the merits, so that's not just.
Right. And everybody that's living in Suffolk County trying to live that peaceful lifestyle, that it's to the detriment of them. Like anybody who's living here and living a law-abiding life, they should be in uproar over this. Because why should we be letting those bad actors out on technicalities when we know that they're going to be guilty, but a defense attorney's presenting this technicality to try to get them out and there not being a real trial.
And again, I think the worst part about it is, when we talk about, common sense tweaks to the law, is it a bad thing that the accused gets notice and evidence of the information in the case? Absolutely not.
Right.
They should get those things. That's great. And all of those things are good, and all of those things could be protected. But should that mean that if there is if the date of birth is written the same way on two separate pieces of paper, but you only get one of those two pieces of paper, should the case be dismissed? Certainly not.
Right.
So let's tweak that. Let's change that. And let's move forward. And so that's where I think we have the difficulty with our legislature, in that they just refuse to engage and refuse to, let's sit down, let's all get everybody in a room, and let's talk about how we can make a few common sense changes to our law, which will make us all safe, but still safeguard the defendant's rights.
We know you're at the forefront of advocating for these things. Is there like a coalition of district attorneys? Like I know we've worked together as far as like the PBA and yourself. Is there any like coalition of district attorneys who feel the same way like you do and go up there and advocate for these things?
Yeah, so you have 62 counties, and then you've got the special prosecutor. So you have 63, members of the State District Attorneys Association, and that's a big tent. And I think for the most part, we do, but there's certain DAs, agree on some things, disagree on other things. So it's difficult to get that whole entire coalition. But what we've been doing, like we're trying to change the drug driving law, and we had a press conference. I don't know if you guys were there, but we had a press conference in the Bronx, and the Bronx DA was there, and the Queens DA was supportive of it. So we do have these coalitions, and but I think that a lot of it is politics, and a lot of it is rhetoric, because I think a lot of people are just, I'm against it.
Right.
Well, it's like criminal justice reform. You're either for or against criminal justice reform. You can't look at it like that, because we should all be for criminal justice reform.
Reform by nature should be an improvement of some kind.
So let's make whatever reform we're going to do. Let's just make sure it's
the right
as fair and effective as possible.
But the legislature kind of refuses to get together, engage with the professionals in that field. Listen, like every legislator comes from their own profession. They have their own expertise. They're not all law enforcement. They're not all attorneys. That's why they should have brought all of us to the table to do these reforms.
Absolutely. And I think when you come to bail, that's what frustrates me about bail, is you have the legislature who they're substituting their I don't even want to say expertise, I'll say knowledge, right? Or thoughts about what bail should be. And then they're giving you this one size fits all law. And then they're pretending that it works. But again, when you go back to the body parts case, obviously, it doesn't work. What happens when you get a suspected serial killer who's driving around with no license, when I was when I was a federal prosecutor, we would have MS-13 members, right, who would come from El Salvador. They would come into the country. They'd be in the country for a week. We'd have no ID. We'd have no names, and they commit a murder. And we would look at it and we'd say, okay, we know this individual committed the murder. We don't know his name. We're putting it together our cases. Obviously, everybody's terrified of the MS-13, so it's going to take some time. Meanwhile, this guy's a very dangerous guy. Mm-hmm. Once we figure out who he is and there's a immigration hold, right, because he's here, he's undocumented, he's here illegally. All right, we'll charge him with entering the country illegally. We'll make that dangerousness argument. We'll keep him in. And then in the 30 days we have, we'll put together our murder. But at least for those 30 days, we'll know that that society will be protected from this individual who's already, we believe, committed murder. So that's a system that makes sense.
Right. Absolutely. And, to hold people accountable for the murders they commit here, right? We don't necessarily want to see the people who commit a murder in, say, Brentwood here in Suffolk County just get deported right away. We want them to be punished for their crimes. We want them to be held accountable too. It'd be great if they could serve their sentence and then be deported, right? We want to make sure they're punished and maybe get out of here. But we don't want them to just all of a sudden be up and gone either.
Well, that's funny that you should mention that, because we talk about that. We talk about ICE,
right?
And the media is very interested. Do you talk to ICE? I was like, of course I talk to ICE. I talk to all of our law enforcement partners, and the vast majority of my conversations are ICE arises in the context of there'll be a murder, mm-hmm. right? And if this murder happens to occur in our immigrant community, and we find out that the suspect is undocumented. We also find out some of the witnesses are undocumented. What do we do with that information? Okay, we're going to work our case, where we're also going to call ICE and say, hey, listen, this is what we have going on. This is the universe of individuals. So if you could maintain the status quo and not, take any enforcement action on these individuals, mm-hmm. because we want to keep our witnesses here and we want to keep the defendant here, because we want to establish the case, and if we can, arrest him and then hold him responsible.
Right.
We don't want, because you would be doing him the best service ever if you come in a week prior to us being able to charge him with murder, you deport him.
Right. Because that might have been his plan to begin with, to get out of here.
So obviously you talk, so we talk to all our law enforcement partners, including ICE. But the vast majority of the time I'm talking to ICE, it's about keeping people in the country.
Right. Which would definitely be contrary to what the national narrative is right now.
And the other thing is, I have nothing to do with immigration. I don't have jurisdiction over immigration. When I was a federal prosecutor, I did, and I did prosecute those cases. I don't prosecute these cases. So when we talk about ICE, I have nothing to do with immigration law. So that's not the subject of our conversation.
Right. We're worried about the murderers.
Yeah, and we're worried about the enforcement of the laws that I have jurisdiction over.
Right. So when you took over as district attorney, we had one of the most infamous serial killer cases going on here right at home in Suffolk County. And it was unsolved for a very long period of time, decades, really, if you go back and look at some of the dates that are involved in this. So when you took over as district attorney, what sort of programs did you put into place in order to try to build that case and bring justice to those who needed it?
So I think the best thing that I had going into the case was a clean slate. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, being in law enforcement, I know, and people always will tell me, the Karen Reed case, they'll say, what do you think of the Karen Reed case? I said, I have no idea. I don't follow it. I don't know any of the evidence. So I have no I have no opinion about it. The Golden State Killer case. What do you think about the Golden State Killer case? I don't know. I have never seen the evidence, so I don't know. You think they, the Kohlberger case, you think they did the right thing? I said, I have read a couple of stories. I don't know the evidence, so I don't know enough. I know what it takes to charge a case and to make plans on a case, and no one in the general public would have access to that. So if you sort of apply that to Gilgo, even though it was, front and center, on Long Island, prior to me getting involved in the case, I didn't really concern myself with it because I said, I'll never have enough information to know. So when I came on the case, I didn't have any preconceived, it's going to be this or that, or I just didn't know. But as I was campaigning and thinking about it and being asked questions about it, I knew what we had to do was you have now, like you said, an unsolved number of cases stretched out over a number of years, occurring a while back. You need to get all the resources together. State police, Suffolk County Police, of course, sheriffs, FBI, Secret Service, all of the agencies, because all the agencies have certain talents and certain things that they're really good at, and a whole ton of resources. So you do that, you bring everybody together, and you investigate in the same room. You don't silo it off. So the FBI is off doing this, PD's off doing this, we're off doing that. That doesn't work. So you bring everybody together. You take all of that information that goes back decades, right, before computers, and you digitalize it so you can search it, and then you come together and you start without any thought, and you look at the evidence and you follow that evidence and you go wherever that evidence leads, and hopefully you'll be able to get a result. And that's what we did, and that's what we were able to do. It's funny because a lot of people will come to me and say, "Oh, I remember you guaranteed that you'd make an arrest," and I said, "I never guaranteed that because I just didn't know. What I might have said was, look, we're going to get together, we're going to work with our law enforcement partners, and we're going to give ourselves the best chance to solve it." But you never know. Some cases you can get a result, and some other cases you can't.
Yeah. And I know, it's been all over the newspapers, all over News 12, local news, even Fox News has covered it. This case has really been sort of groundbreaking locally, at least within New York State too, with the sort of evidence you've been able to present and use in this case when it comes to DNA.
Well, I think it's a combination of the two. So all of those things that we did and all the accomplishments we had to have were because back in the day, the police and the forensic experts, the lab personnel, they did the right thing back then. The FBI came in, did phone work. They did a fantastic job. If all those things hadn't been done, long before I had anything to do with the case, we wouldn't have been able to get the great result. So we had that. We also had these hairs, right? And they were hair shafts, pieces of hair, which traditionally you can never get nuclear DNA from. So we said we could, if utilizing some of these new techniques that allow you to get a nuclear DNA profile from a hair shaft, if we use that technique and we develop a suspect and we look at all that other evidence, now maybe there's something we could do. Maybe there's a place we could go with this. And that's essentially what we did. We worked with a lot of really talented people. We got a lot of, a lot of great things happened along the way. And here we are.
Right. And what's really cool about this too, and the advancement in technology is, eventually it did lead to a prime suspect and an arrest with probable cause. But once you had this prime suspect, Rex Heuermann, locked up, the investigation didn't stop. You kept looking into some of these cold cases. And what initially was Rex being charged with 4 murders, now he's charged with 7. And I think that's a great example of how, just because we have a part of the puzzle, we want to make sure we have the complete puzzle.
Yeah, I think so. What had happened was we had the hairs, we had the phone work, which showed that that the person who killed the Gilgo 4, right? They were utilizing 4 separate burner phones, but they were at certain important times in the investigation, they were utilizing those 4 separate burner phones, if they were the same person, in Massapequa Park and Midtown Manhattan. Now, anybody who lives on Long Island knows, okay, well, if it's Massapequa Park and Midtown Manhattan, probably lives in Massapequa Park or is has an association of Massapequa Park and works in the city. So we had that, and then we got the information with regard to the ogre.
Right.
The day before, the last victim, Amber Costello, was seen. She was with this individual who's this really big guy driving a Chevy Avalanche, dark colored Chevy Avalanche. So we took a look at that. We were able to establish that there was a Rex Uhrman who lived in Massapequa Park, worked in Midtown Manhattan, who owned such a vehicle. We went back to Google. We saw that same vehicle parked in front of his house. So now this is really good stuff. We have those hairs, but it's not enough, right? So now we got to look at his phone. We got to look at his financial records. We got to get his DNA. We got to get and we got his family's DNA. And now we got to put all those pieces together. And I think that's really what helps with the task force. So we got together, and all of the members of the task force, really, really did great work. Like every single member, state police, FBI, Suffolk County, of course, Suffolk County PD, they were the foundation. My office, sheriff's office, all of they gave a little piece, but you get everybody in the room together and you say, okay, this is where we are. This is what we need, but we need more, because it's the goal isn't to arrest someone. Because in order to arrest someone, you need probable cause. More likely than not, the person committed a crime. To convict somebody at trial, you need proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
So you're looking for that proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So let's not kid ourselves. So let's work at that proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Also, how do you charge a case? In the in Suffolk County, you have if you arrest somebody, you only have about 4 or 5 days in which to present that case to the grand jury or they get out. So now murders that span back decades involving, hundreds or over 100 witnesses. How do you do a grand jury presentation in 4 days? You don't. It's not possible. So what you do is you start the grand jury investigation, and then you build and build and build and build. And then when you're done, then you charge it, then you go out and arrest them, and then you issue search warrants. So all these things require collaboration and thought, and it has to be, everything has to go off, at precisely the right time. And that's what we managed to do. And the reason why we managed to do it is because we work so closely together.
Right.
How was it like keeping all that information silent though, too? Because this is going on for months and years, like a lot of this information. And I'm sure that you guys figured it out for a while before you actually arrested him. Like, how did you keep all that silent so other people didn't know that he wasn't tipped off? And
yeah, so it was a very interesting, a thing, and we were trying to keep the grand jury, secret, and things get out, right? Things like seep out. So, and the grand jury process was long. I'm trying to think. It was months long. I don't remember exactly how long, but I remember sort of like every night, like, is this the night when I wake up? And I thought that one morning I'd wake up and I'd see in the newspaper or on TV, Suffolk, doing secret grand jury investigation into Gilgo Beach. And, the reason why that would be so disastrous is we knew, or I thought very strongly that the person who committed these crimes would be surveilling our investigation, trying to gain insight into what we were doing through the media, trying to find out, what do they know? Are they close? Are they not close? That's why prior to the arrest, I wanted to make it seem as much as possible that, same old, like we're as lost as we've been the last, decade. And we're not, because we wanted to lull that perpetrator into false sense of security, because we wanted to, at the same time of the arrest, we wanted to issue those search warrants in the hope that we would get evidence. And we did do that. And we did get, really helpful evidence out of the house and other locations.
I think that's important for the general public to hear too, because there could be times where the general public thinks the police aren't doing what they want them to do, or thinks that an investigation into something they hold near and dear to their heart is going nowhere. But the reality is, you're putting together the case. You're putting together enough, and as you put it, is perfect. You don't want just the probable cause to make an arrest. You want the conviction at the end. You want to get the bad guy, and you want to make sure they're held accountable. And I think that daunting task and being able to describe it as, as it is, a long and arduous process, I think it's important for the general public to hear that sometimes you have to be patient.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, the media always kind of jokes with me and says, "Oh, you keep everything secret. You don't say, But there are, definite investigative reasons to keep things secret. And obviously, the fact that we were doing the investigation, it's important to keep that secret, because if the perpetrator knows you're doing an investigation, they're going to go back to their house and say, I mean, they're coming to get me. What do I need to get rid of? Right. So to the extent they haven't already done that, you want to make sure they don't do that. But I'll give you a really obvious reason with regard to the Gilgo case. The sort of the mainstream thought about the Gilgo case was that these women were wrapped in burlap. The burlap being the kind of burlap that you have in a nursery. Right. And really the reality of it was a camouflage burlap that you use in hunting, right? Two totally different things. But during the investigation, a lot of people would come up and say, I know who the killer is. And the reason why I know who he is because he works in a nursery and he has access to this burlap. So now we're saying, all right, of course we don't say it, but we're thinking, okay, wrong burlap. So right off the bat, we know, we're probably not dealing with the same person. So,
which is helpful as well. It's like guess who? You could get rid of some of those suspects.
And also when you talk about certain aspects, if you do get a perpetrator, it didn't happen in this case, but if you do get a perpetrator and there's a certain signature in the crime scene itself that the public doesn't know about, and a person is coming in and confessing, and then say, well, how did the body look? And they talk about this signature that's not out in the public. So now you have a high level of confidence. Okay, this really seems like it's the person who does it, because only the killer or anyone who was at that scene at that time would know that was the condition of the body when it was left. So all these things are helpful, and these are all reasons why, the general rule of investigations is do not disclose anything unless there's a good investigative reason to do so. Right. And if there's a good investigative reason not to do so, you certainly don't do it.
Yeah, and that's got to be a little heart-wrenching too at the same time. Like if you have, say, a prime suspect, but you're not letting certain information out yet. You're still trying to build up this case. So the guy's actually still out there. There has to be this worry of the risk of, what if he does do it again while we already think he might be a prime suspect, but we're not ready to quite take him into custody?
Well, I've talked about that and the tension of this investigation. And again, you looking back on it, it was stressful, and the stress was, and I would joke with my wife and say, this is the case that'll kill me, because the stress of being so tantalizingly close, but not quite being able to close that loop with the grand jury, because it was going to be an extensive grand jury that took time, and while you're there, and he's out there. Right. And so there's a risk there. So now you want to have a successful conclusion, but you want to keep people safe. Right. And you don't want, and then the third consideration is you don't want it to get prematurely disclosed. Right. So in the first day of the grand jury, it's real easy. The most important thing is you got to get the evidence in. But then as you get the evidence in, now all of a sudden it comes, when does the balance change between risk of disclosure and risk to the public where you move? And, our original plan was to charge all four of the victims. We got to the three, Maureen, Brainerd, Barnes. We weren't complete.
Oh, okay.
And then at that point we were like, okay, now the balance has shifted where we have to move because, we could be discovered, so we have to charge this case out. And I came out of the grand jury after and on that day. And then we were confronted with certain facts, and now it's 4:30 at night. And we're like, okay, we've got to take this thing down. And all of these plans, all of the things that we had choreographed and thought about that was going to happen, a couple of weeks in advance or a week or two in advance, was now going to happen tonight. And we had, 10 minutes in which to put it all together. And again,
that's crazy.
That's impressive. So impressive.
Well, again, credit to, primarily Suffolk, because they were the main actors, but, Suffolk State Police, Suffolk County Lab, sheriffs, the FBI in Carolina, the team in New York. All of these things, we had to go out, we had to arrest them, and then we had to seamlessly execute all these search warrants. And as this is unfolding, I'm saying we really have no choice, but it's not going to work the way we hope. And it pretty much did. I mean, and that's a credit to the professionalism of all these agencies and all the people in the agencies.
Right. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. The way you investigated this case, and I'm assuming because there are still cold cases out there, there's still some form of investigation, maybe connecting him to even more murders. Well, we'll see into the future. But you did create a cold case task force after this, and it kind of models what you did with the Gilgo case, yep. I imagine. Yeah. So one of the things is, Gilgo, sucked up all the oxygen in the room. So then, so we immediately started working on Gilgo, and we were off and running. I think, I started in January. February 1st, we had our first task force meeting. March 14th, like, all right, we have a really solid suspect. And we were all, it was like a sprint at that point. So, so Gilgo sort of, sucked all the air out of the room. But then as we're doing this and as we're doing our investigation, our due diligence, talking with the police, as always, of course, now we're developing, hey, this isn't the only cold case. And, right.
and there are a lot of other cold cases where really good investigative foundation has been laid, but now maybe some of the new forensic techniques, some new developments, maybe we could, solve these cases. So we've created this, this cold case unit again, working with our partners, primarily Suffolk County PD, and whatever agencies might have had the original murders. And what what we're trying to do is using that same model, can we get closure for other people? And we've done, we've solved, 2 cold cases since I've been there, and we're working on more.
Ray, I think that's great, and we preach all the time the importance of partnerships and working together, and the value of being innovative and looking into the future to use new technologies to help keep everybody in Suffolk County safe. And I love having you as our district attorney. I think Suffolk County is safer because of it. I think Suffolk County is safer because of those partnerships you're willing to embrace with, Commissioner Catalina with the police department, Sheriff Errol Toulon with the sheriff's office, and everybody, our federal partners. So I think as a Suffolk County resident, we're in a very good spot as far as fighting crime goes right now. And I appreciate all your efforts there.
Well, thank you. And I can say in the 30 years that I've been involved in this, and I'm not just saying it because I'm the guy, but, and again, I can say this because it's just not me. I'm a very small part of it. You mentioned all of those pieces, Kevin Catalina, outstanding. His team, Rob before him was great. Kevin is just doing wonderful. And his team, they're really great. Really, really great. Our county executive, very supportive. Our sheriff, unbelievable, right? Those are the Suffolk parts. Now you have parts outside your control. So you have to talk about our federal partners. Always had a good relationship with our federal partners in the Eastern District of New York, but now never been better. Never been better, but never been more supportive. We have a SALSA, a special assistant United States attorney, who is a Suffolk County DA, who is embedded with our federal partners, who we give Suffolk County cases to. So we're able to work those cases again when appropriate with our federal partners. So, great. Just really fortunate to be a small part of this larger law enforcement puzzle where all of the pieces are really, really excellent.
Yeah, Ray, thank you for coming on today. Thank you for informing the public of everything going on in the DA's office, some of the stuff you're working on, and not just with the Gilgo case and the cold cases, but lobbying for the changes we need to help make our jobs easier to put these bad guys away.
No, and thank you guys. I want to say that, you guys have really, assisted us in that one critical piece where we advocate for public safety, and you guys have been a great voice in that. So I want to thank you as well.
Thanks, Ray. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.